family business is complicated because not only are you dealing with the inner workings of running the organization, making sure it's profitable, making sure it's successful, serving your customers, you're also trying to figure out how you're going to get along with the other members of your family who oftentimes when you're going into a generational family business are mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. How are you going to navigate those things and still want to talk to each other? I mean, on the weekend, at Sunday dinner, potentially at Thanksgiving, to be a resilient business leader, especially in the small business space, which is what we deal with. There are two things that you need. The first is strong interpersonal effectiveness skills. So being able to communicate, being able to be authentic and vulnerable. And then the other is kind of finding that what else. And so I say a what else is something in your business beyond profit, beyond the initial purpose of what you do that drives you as a business leader.
Do you cultivate resilience in yourself and in your team? If not, it's probably something you want to be thinking about. And today we'll be hearing about some of the reasons why and how you can be doing it. And to help us get into that topic, as well as the topic of family-run businesses, I'm joined today by Chrissy Myers. Chrissy is the author of the book Reluctantly Resilient, sharing lessons from her own career and advice on how leaders can be more resilient to the challenges of work and life. She's also the CEO of two companies, AUI, which is a third-generation family business, and Clarity HR, a startup that provides insurance benefits and HR services to small businesses and non-profits. Chrissy describes herself as the chief cheerleader for both companies, setting the direction, steering content, and finding creative ways to disrupt two very well-established business sectors. And in between all of that, Chrissy also finds the time to support various non-profits, philanthropic ventures, as well as a quite busy family life by the sounds of it. So we've had a few guests before who've talked about their experiences in business with family. A couple that stand out would be Greg DeVore, who started a company with his brother, and of course the amazing husband and wife team that is Emily and Alan Braithwaite. So if you'd like to hear another experience of a family business, this is the episode for you. We'll be hearing about the challenges and opportunities involved from Chrissy today, as well as talking about her book, resilience, and leadership. So don't touch that dial, as they used to say way back in the dark ages, because it's going to be a great conversation.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Chrissy, good morning for you, I think, given the time difference. It's afternoon for me, but either way, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, David. I'm excited to be here and have a conversation about leadership.
Well, on that note, I'm going to throw you in at the deep end. I did warn you I was going to do this. So it's not really that much of a deep end, is it? But if you'd like to just kick us off by introducing yourself to the listeners, tell us all a bit about your career so far, your background, what you do today, and why you do it.
Sure. So I am Chrissy Myers, and I am coming to you from Akron, Ohio. So the birthplace of Goodyear and the rubber tires. So you're welcome, everyone who drives. I grew up raised and rooted in Akron. I grew up in a family business called AUI. It was, if you want a car, you'll work for us. If you want us to pay for college, you'll work for us. So I did. The family business is in health insurance, small business benefits. So we deal with things that have to do with employees. And so went to school, graduated from college. My dad said, "Do you want to stay here?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because you've given me every cruddy job on the planet. I have packed chocolates for Christmas and walked around the conference table a million times. I've done customer service. I've taught everyone how to use a computer before it was even cool. You made me drive to Youngstown, which is about a 45-minute commute when I first got my driver's license. So I'm trying to figure out exactly why I would want to be here, Dad, because all the jobs that you've given me are boring and I don't like insurance." So he said, "Will you give me 6 months?" And I said, "No, I will give you 6 weeks. So in those 6 weeks, he gave me everything in an organization that I wanted, everything that I wanted in a job, the ability to have autonomy over making decisions, being able to lead projects, being able to start leading people. And then something happened in the United States called the Affordable Care Act. When that passed in 2010, he took a step forward. He took a step backward. I took a step forward. And I continued to lead the organization. I purchased it from my mother. My dad passed in 16. I purchased it from my mom in 19. And then upon that, promptly started another organization called Clarity HR, which is a small business fractional HR for organizations that do not want, or cannot afford a full-time HR person, as well as helping leaders not to feel like they're hostages around their people. Because sometimes when we hire, we do those first few hires, we have the first few people in our team, we get really attached to them, and making decisions and performance managing can be complicated for those individuals. So while all that was happening, in addition to that, David, I also wrote a book called Reluctantly Resilient. And then I have Team Awesome Sauce. So Team Awesome Sauce, when you've got 4 different people with 3 different last names, a mom who does branding and a dad who played team sports, you get a team name, Team Awesome Sauce, a team motto, put more awesome in the sauce, a purpose statement, which is we radiate awesome to the world, and a whole set of core values and a decision framework. Because not only are we an entrepreneurial family, family is really what's important to us. So that's really kind of where I am in space. I also believe that serving the community is just as important as doing business in the community. So I serve on several nonprofit boards and do a lot of work with Clarity and AUI around corporate philanthropy.
Wow. Okay. And now I feel like I'm not doing enough with my life. Like,
That is
how
not
do
true.
you fit all of that in? Like, so 2 businesses, an entrepreneur family is a way of life.
Absolutely. Especially if you want to keep together.
Yeah. And how many nonprofits was it?
So I'm currently on 4 different nonprofit boards. I'm getting ready to roll off of one because I'm getting ready to take the chair of, it's a government and nonprofit organization. So it's the Summit County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, Mental Health Services Board. So we oversee about $60 million of government taxpayer dollars and kind of distribute throughout the county for mental health and addiction services.
Okay. Well, worthy causes as well. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, the natural question now is, do you ever get bored? Do you ever have time to get bored? Like,
well, when I get bored, I either start another business, write another book, or serve on a nonprofit. So I don't sit still.
Yeah, I'm getting that impression already. Yeah. Well, no, fair play to you. So there's loads of things in there already that we can talk about that would be very interesting. I'm going to start with the family business.
Yeah.
So I can imagine there's quite a delicate balance to be had there, isn't there, between the legacy of a family business and then implementing your own vision, particularly when you've bought it out or you're taking on that leadership role. So can you tell us a bit about how you approached that?
Oh, absolutely. And I will be very honest and transparent in telling you that if anybody thinks it's easy to transition a family business, or they've said it's easy, they're lying to you, because family business is complicated. Because not only are you dealing with the inner workings of running the organization, making sure it's profitable, making sure it's successful, serving your customers, you're also trying to figure out how you're going to get along with the other members of your family who oftentimes, when you're going into a generational family business, are mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. How are you going to navigate those things and still want to talk to each other? I mean, on the weekend, at Sunday dinner, potentially at Thanksgiving, because at the end of the day, even once we transition a family business, we're still family at the end of it. So figuring out how to navigate that successfully. And my recommendation, I mean, there's 5 things that we talk about in tips for successful family business. But the first is to learn to talk to each other. And I think the easiest way to do that is to go to therapy, especially when you're looking at transitioning the business. Because at the end of the day, the business is going to sell, whether it sells to a family member or it sells to another person outside of the family. And if you want it to sell to a family member, you still want to be able to talk to each other when the dust settles. And it was a difficult transition for my mom and I, because we were grieving the loss of my dad. He had passed away in 2016. We were working through that transition, and I had been running the organization for a period of time. And while she was still there, she wasn't necessarily making a lot of the decisions for the company. And so it made it a little bit difficult to kind of figure out, hey, all of a sudden she's here and she wants to make these decisions, but I've been making these decisions for 5 years. How do we work through this and navigate? And oh, by the way, on top of transitioning family business, there's this thought, I think, that a lot of people who don't grow up in a family business think, and that is the business is always gifted to you. And that's not true. The majority of individuals and family businesses have to buy it. I had to buy mine. I'm continuing to make payments on it, and I will for a period of time to make it manageable for our family to be able to grow the business and also feed ourselves and take care of grandma. But that's something that I think a lot of times people forget is they think, oh, the business is just going to either be gifted to me because I've worked here all my life, or if you're not in the family business, you're just thinking that that person didn't earn it. And you don't see all of the work that goes into working in that organization, especially as family members. There's times where employees get to go home and they don't have to talk to mom and dad about a business question. They don't get phone calls at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night from their leadership, who's also their parent, saying, hey, did you remember to handle this client issue? I've got a question about how this invoice needs to be paid. I mean, we talk about entrepreneurs needing to turn off. You take that into a family business and it magnifies it by about 1,000. At least that's my observation.
It's not having worked in a family business is difficult to comment, but I guess the thing that's always struck me from the outside is nearly everyone at some point in their career is going to hate their boss.
Yes.
And so I've always thought, like, I don't really want to work with family because I might end up hating them.
And that's true. I think you are absolutely accurate. And at any given time, there's always going to be a disconnect in communication. And it gets difficult when that's mom or dad. And if you grew up and you had a great childhood around your family business, going into the business and learning how to work with your parents is very different than being raised by your parents. And then you have that transition when skill set starts to transition and they're looking at retirement or they're dealing with a health crisis. And how do you navigate this? Not only as the business leader, but also as a son, a daughter. How do you manage the differences? Because it's really important that we can balance what is at work and what is at home. And I think for anybody to say we keep clear boundaries and we only talk about work at work and we only talk about home at home, I've never met those people, David. I don't think they exist because family business is messy. It's beautiful, but it can also be very complicated.
I think that's true of any job you have, any work you do. I mean, who really leaves it at the office or at the front door when they get home?
No one other than that. No.
You're right. Another perhaps more positive way of looking at it is if you are working with family, you've got more of an incentive to resolve those sorts of issues. Whereas in a normal, in inverted commas, business, you might just be like, well, do you know what? It's just a job. I don't care. I'm going to leave it.
Oh, absolutely. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're trying to quit the family business. So as someone who thought about it, and I wrote about it in my book, Reluctantly Resilient, thinking about, I could do anything. I went to career mapping with a consultant and said, what can I do? I can't live in this contentious environment at this point in time because my mom and I, we were dealing with grief. We were dealing with trying to transition and she's holding on for dear life on one side and I'm holding on the other. And we're just having this continuous tug of war. And our employees are in the middle going, we like you. We want to work for you, but she still pays our paycheck. So what does this need to look like? So when I went to this career consultant, I answered all of these questions, did all these assessments about who I am and my personality and how I lead. And she said, Chrissy, you have everything in a position that you could possibly want. But the question is, do you have the stomach to stay? Can you walk through the hard times with your mom? Are you willing to? Because at that point in time, my mom had said, we should go to therapy so we can learn how to talk to each other. And I was mad because I'm like, I don't need to go to therapy. That's dumb. I don't have time. And so working through that navigation of like, you know what, maybe it makes sense for us to start learning how to talk to each other, to build those skills, to be able to transition, because we're talking about complicated things. We're talking about what I'm going to be paying and what the terms are for the organization. But then she's also wondering, what are you going to do with the legacy that we've built as a business? Because my mom and dad worked together for over 30 years. They built the business together after he had bought it from my grandmother. So, it was really trying to figure out, what am I going to do to continue to move the company in a positive direction and have that trust around something that for her was an extension of her and my dad's relationship. And almost, like the third child to my brother and I. Now, thankfully, my parents had a very healthy relationship with their business. They did not choose their business over us, especially me, obviously, because I'm still in it. I think that a lot of times as business owners, especially in entrepreneurial families, we have a tendency to get really down into the weeds within our business. And sometimes the things that we forget about are the most important things, their family. So what I tell people when they say, what's the secret to transitioning a successful family business? Say, to the next generation, it is having a healthy relationship with your family and with the business. Because if your children look at this business as the third, fourth, fifth child that always gets the attention and you never pay attention to them because you're always worrying on your business, they are never going to want it because they've watched how it has destroyed their relationship that they have with you. And I just went on a huge tangent.
No, it's interesting. I mean, again, there's a parallel there, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs, even when it's not a family business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the alternative spouse rather than the third or fourth child.
Absolutely.
You know, I think there's lessons there for any founder in any kind of business, really, about prioritizing things in your life, isn't there?
Oh, yes. And in leadership, learning to be mindful. I know mindfulness has been a practice that I have really worked on in the last decade, but even so in the last 5 years, of trying to make sure that I am always present, especially when I'm at home or when I'm in community, because I don't know about you, David, I'm not serving anyone if my mind is on the thing that either happened yesterday or the thing that has to happen tomorrow. I can't make good decisions. I can't be an effective leader. And I think that oftentimes, especially in startups, we're looking at the organization and we're building, and we're forgetting what the next step could potentially be. And we're forgetting about the family around us, the spouses around us, which is why, paying attention and having balance as an entrepreneur is so important. What are your thoughts about that, especially as you're talking to new emerging leaders?
I think, there's phrases like work-life balance and things like that get bandied around quite a lot. I'm not sure I like the phrase, but I think because balance implies equality, doesn't it, between those different parts of your life? And I don't think many people really, nobody realistically achieves that, do they? Yeah, I was talking to someone a few weeks ago and I thought we're thinking about sleep as well in terms of that, because in theory, that should really be what you spend at least half of your day doing. And then we're like, well, so how does the stats compare in time spent sleeping versus time spent in your business or working versus family time? And I think that, again, balance is the wrong word, but that division between those three elements, I think getting that right is the key to happiness in all three, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think as for the mindfulness point, I totally agree with you. I think, especially in startups, definitely, we get too carried away with the latest shiny object, don't we? And you've got to, whatever that might be, in most startups, it's the cool product that we're going to build, isn't it? Or cool bit of software. And so all the attention, all the focus goes on that and other things like how we're going to find customers, how we're looking after our people, what's our recruitment strategy. Those important things that actually make the business work and succeed are too easily ignored because we want to focus on that cool piece of technology that we're going to build. And so I think being able to recognize those signs in your own mind when you know you're going off on the wrong tangent, I think that's a really important practice. And emerging leaders, that's the time to be learning that and practicing that when the stakes are a little bit lower and you're less likely to destroy the whole company if you get it wrong.
That's fair.
Yeah, and it's a skill that will serve you for the rest of your career as well once you've developed it. So, yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you about resilience now, because I feel like, particularly in the health insurance sector, you mentioned one of the big changes of recent years already. The other one, of course, is the elephant in the room of COVID. I imagine that had quite a big impact on the industry as well.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. So, as a CEO of a company in that kind of industry, or just any company really, how do you encourage that culture of resilience and innovation within your organization?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I would say to be a resilient business leader, especially in the small business space, which is what we deal with, there are two things that you need. The first is strong interpersonal effectiveness skills. So being able to communicate, being able to be authentic and vulnerable. It's okay not to know the answer all the time. And especially during COVID, I think as a leader, for me, it was a true testament of being really honest with my employees and being able to say, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but this is what we're going to do today. And if you have a question, I'm going to look and try to find the answer, and I'm going to get back to you as soon as I can. But I'm also going to tell you that I'm going to work on making decisions. And I know that they may not always be right, hindsight, but for where we are right now, I'm going to make the decision and I'm going to be confident in it. So building those interpersonal effectiveness skills was really important. And then the other is kind of finding that what else. And so I say a what else is something in your business beyond profit, beyond the initial purpose of what you do that drives you as a business leader. Because if we don't have a what else, it's easy just to create everything and look at it as a job. It's no longer a calling. It's no longer leadership. It's just my 9 to 5. And I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just providing a service. So for me, our what else with serving the community is just as important as doing business in the community, especially during COVID. And as we have continued to emerge out into our post-pandemic world, it has been what can we do within our organization to impact change within our community as a whole. It doesn't mean that we're going to do that in the insurance space. We're going to probably do that in the volunteer space. So we give our employees a certain amount of hours a year to volunteer on our dime. We also incentivize our team members where the person who has the most service hours, because a lot of them are serving in the community, whether we ask them to or not. So the individual with the most service hours gets a donation to the charity of their choice. So then they can choose, this is where my impact, I would like it to go. And we like to take our dollars as an organization and support the organizations that our team members care about. So I would say, especially in uncertainty, those are the two things that have driven me the most. Building those interpersonal effectiveness skills, going to therapy, practicing mindfulness, that's all under that interpersonal effectiveness umbrella, whether people like to think of it that way or not. If you don't want to think about it with using the T word or therapy, you can think of it as building your emotional intelligence. So building those EQ skills, and then also finding the what else that can drive your business beyond profit.
I like both of those, particularly the example. I think that's a really lovely way of, as you said at the beginning, really, of serving the community as well as doing business in the community. And I think, in the COVID context, so many companies, I think, were kind of caught by surprise. And there was, we can all remember seeing the panicked sort of press releases at like the day before the first lockdown and stuff like that. But I think, it's a much more measured and I would say actually mature leadership approach to just tell people honestly, this is what we know. This is how we're going to make our decisions until things settle down, if they ever do. Because we didn't really know back then either, did we? There was a lot of uncertainty around it all. And it's that uncertainty, I think, that is addressed by, or at least mitigated to some extent in people's minds, isn't it? If they can see their leader being calm, being collected, being truthful and open and honest about things.
And being human. I think being human is so important, being able to be authentic about it. Saying, I know, especially the first couple of months in COVID, I felt like I was making decisions every day and I was changing directions all the time because we didn't know what was going to happen. We had different rules that were coming from, in the United States, the federal government versus our state government versus our local government. We had a lot of different layers of questions. And so I think that for me to be able to tell them, this is what the answer is today, but I'm giving myself permission to be wrong, and I'm giving myself permission to learn new things, and enabling them to know that it's okay to not know the answers all the time as a leader. I think sometimes that's what makes you a stronger leader, is being willing to admit, being calm in the chaos, but also realizing that, I don't have to know everything all the time. It's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it makes people relate to you better as well, particularly when things were so uncertain. I mean, it wasn't too dissimilar in the UK either. Perhaps in slightly different ways, but I mean, we had things like our Prime Minister at the time was saying he's still going to shake everyone's hand and he's going to meet everyone in person. And like, this is 2 weeks before the first lockdown. And he must have known. Anyway, let's not get into politics. And then you've got the chief scientist disagreeing with them on TV as well when they're stood next to each other in a press conference. And and that sort of thing is actually quite a good example of the leadership that doesn't help when you're dealing with uncertainty, is the two top leaders having an argument in front of you. Like,
yes.
Yeah. So I think that's why the kind of the communication skills, the authenticity, the not being afraid to be human and a little bit flawed and a little bit vulnerable about how you're feeling about all of this uncertainty as well, really helps. And it's back again, I think, to exactly as you said, it's emotional intelligence, isn't it? And empathy.
Yes.
Okay. Well, on that subject, so in your experience then, what role do you think vulnerability has to play in resilience more widely?
Oh, I think it's one of the primary drivers of resilience, because being able to be vulnerable and saying, I'm not perfect, and I don't have it all figured out. I don't know what all the answers are. I would say as someone who's a recovering perfectionist, learning to embrace that vulnerable side is really important. And I will say that I connected most with my team when I realized that they don't need me to be perfect. They need me to be a person, and they need me to be someone who they can ask questions to, and I can be honest and give them an answer where it may not always be right, but they know that it's going to come from my heart. And I know that also part of being vulnerable is also being willing to apologize when things are wrong, to say, hey, I misread this, or I acted in this way. It was not my best self, or I made a mistake in judgment. What can we do to move forward? I think that's really important, especially in young leaders, because when we're young in our career or we're new to a role, especially in leadership, we want everybody to think we have all of it together. And I think that what's more important is that they know that if we don't, we're going to tell them, and we still need their help to get down the road to whatever the mission is, whatever the position requires. It still takes a team effort.
I think there's a lot to be said for reaching that sort of, it's almost like a level of acceptance, isn't it? That you're never going to be able to make the perfect decision. I too am a recovering perfectionist, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
I think we all are, aren't we? You're never going to make the perfect decision, but I don't think anyone realistically expects you to. And this, I think, is where leaders, we get stuck in our own minds sometimes, don't we? Kind of make it worse for ourselves. But actually, I mean, most of the people that we're leading, they don't expect us to get it right every single time. All they really want us to do is make the best decision we can with the information we have at the time.
Yes.
And be honest about that.
Yeah. Yes. You're exactly right.
Yeah. And the caring point is spot on as well. I think, do you know, I've found this to be somewhat controversial with some people when I've had this conversation. And I don't understand why. To my mind, if you're in a position of leadership and you don't care about your people, you shouldn't be in a position of leadership.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And I think there is a difference between these are the facts and this is the decision that we have to make, and saying these are the facts, this is a decision that we have to make. We know it's hard, but this is the direction that we're going. I think that just having that little twist in the nuance of making sure that individuals still have the capacity to be heard, still have the capacity to, can I give you an argument? Can we talk about it? It doesn't mean that we're going to change the decision or that we can make a different decision, but at least enabling them to know or to have some type of autonomy within kind of those types of conversations. I would say, David, probably for me, coming from that HR space, knowing that there are going to be times where it is black and white. We have to make this decision, but it doesn't mean we have to be jerks about it. It doesn't mean that we can't have a positive tone or a tone that is connected, that we still can't care for an individual. Sometimes someone has to be let go. The best thing that we can do for the organization is to afford someone another opportunity to be successful in another place. But there's a difference between saying it that way and just, you're fired. So how do you make sure as a leader that you can connect and you can be authentic through the hard conversations and the easy conversations? I think that being congruent is something that as leaders mature, it becomes more important and more impactful. But I think sometimes that comes with maturity, with the length of time that you've been a leader. I mean, I will tell you, as a emerging leader, years ago, I was not nearly as congruent or effective and efficient in having empathy. I was always, this is the decision. I don't know why you don't like it. Well, it doesn't matter because I'm in charge. So you're just going to get over it. That was not the right approach to have. I have changed dramatically in the last few years.
Yeah, same. I think the workplace has changed alongside that though, because I mean, certainly when I was a new leader myself, it was a very different workplace in terms of the employee-employer relationship and that whole dynamic. It was very, I don't want to say it wasn't necessarily toxic. I think toxicity was a lot easier to achieve.
There was more hierarchy. I think there's times where depending on the type of organization you're in, there can be a fair amount of hierarchical culture, which can be difficult to navigate, especially for new leaders, because having the ability to relate to the individuals that are on your team is really important. And it comes, you've got to build that skill set. It's not something that just happens overnight. And you can't just read one business book or one book on communication and think all of a sudden I'm a leadership expert. It takes time and it takes practice of those skills.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there was no expectation though, or it wasn't not even that it wasn't normalized. It just wasn't even on the radar, was it? That you would or you should care about your people, or that feelings and emotions had any place at work or anything like that. In a way, it's quite an optimistic way of looking at things now in terms of how much things have changed in a relatively short period of time. And I do think the COVID experience has had a big impact on that.
Oh, absolutely. I would say on the communication side, in companies learning how to be more flexible with their people, knowing that, there is a possibility that hours can change. Does everybody need to work these set number of hours, or could we work these set number of hours within the flexibility of a 7-day week or a 4-day week? Having some of those questions and challenges. Especially when no one could take their kids to daycare. How does the work get done? So how does that flexibility have to play? And I think that especially in dealing with human capital, as leaders, we had to figure out, I love the work that these individuals are doing. I hate the fact that we can't be connected or that we have to do it this way. How can we be flexible and create a new environment and a new workplace? And then at the same time, how do we maintain culture? How do we maintain communication? Because while there are some things that have greatly improved, one thing that we're starting to see more in the HR space is the lack of communication skills, because individuals have spent so much time on screen as opposed to being in a room with other humans. And so there are some things that I think if you practice interpersonal effectiveness well, you can translate on a screen fairly well. But if you're not doing the camera, you're not using your body language, you're not having a full communication experience, you can lose some of those skills. And so we're having some individuals that are relearning, what does it mean to communicate? How do we communicate? Especially in email. ChatGPT can be really great, but ChatGPT doesn't always know the right tone with which to word a conversation. So being effective and efficient, making sure that you're still having the right type of tone, that you're still building rapport. There's something to be said for efficiency, but there's also a human element that you can't escape.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was going to say with the ChatGPT example, it can help you write an email, it can spell check for you or whatever. But it doesn't know who you're sending it to. It doesn't know what their experience is. It doesn't know what their relationship with you is or what they're expecting from the email or anything like that. Tone in an email is notoriously difficult to convey anyway, even before the days of AI and, soulless machines writing it for you. Yeah, I think, and going back just a couple of steps, I think it was quite interesting that you used the example about letting people go as well as that case for, and I think that's actually a really big and important test for leaders and whether they actually do genuinely care about their people or not. Because again, thinking back to earlier career experiences, how many times have we all someone's leaving the business, right? That's it. I don't need to worry about them anymore or think about them. That's it. They're gone. Not my problem now.
Yes.
Whereas now one of the examples I hear quite a lot and I really love is that leader who has that conversation. Look, unfortunately, we've got to let you go for whatever the reasons are. However, I know, because I know you, I know that you're keen to stay in this industry and you want to achieve these career goals. I happen to know someone at our major competitor, say, or someone else in our industry. They're looking for someone with your skills. Would you like me to make an introduction? Or what else can I do to help you land on your feet with your next role? And then following up, 6 months later, phoning up, how's it going? Did you get that job? If not, what's next? How can I help? That sort of stuff. And again, 10 years ago, nobody was doing that. No one was even thinking about doing that because it's not my job, not my problem, not my employee anymore. Not going to do that. But I think it's getting more common now. That sort of, I don't want to say the softer approach, but the more caring approach to so many things, not just leadership.
I think it's the caring approach, and it's also good business sense, because we're talking about individuals that, the time that most people spend within a position has shortened dramatically, not just because of COVID, but just in general. We don't spend a long time when we're hiring an employee. Most of the time we're looking at 2 to 3 years is the amount of time that person is going to spend in our organization. Would I love everybody to be here for life? Absolutely. But I also know that when they exit, they're going into the community and they are going to be at potentially competitors, but also they could go to work for a customer, because we've had that happen several times. We've had employees go work for a customer. They may go work in an area where they could potentially become our customer. There are so many things in life that can happen. And so to exit someone well, to provide them with an opportunity, doesn't mean you have to hire them back if they were an absolutely awful hire, but you can still treat them like a good human. You can still build a relationship with them because there is value in being connected, especially as the world continues to contract, as we continue to have global conversations. I mean, it's not just the world is continuing to get smaller, and making sure that you build good relationships and have good relationships with how connected we are is so important, especially as a small business owner and a new leader, because what you don't want is to create those ripples in the world of, I hated working for that person and I would never want to work for them again. I mean, that's my goal when people exit my organization is, I hope I have the opportunity to serve or work with Chrissy in some other capacity. That's my hope, is that we can cross paths and we can still be friends and we can still be connected and we can potentially do business together later.
I think that's the only way to look at it in this day and age, isn't it? You know, even for the big sort of multinationals, I mean, they are still worried, I think, about the perception that is conveyed by their former employees.
They should be.
Yeah, I mean, there's one particularly that stands out that has quite a lot of warehouses around the world. But I won't mention the name because we do stream on their service and we want them blocking us. But you know, and even in a small business, I think that's doubly important. Again, you know, it kind of depends on how big your industry is, but also it doesn't. I think it's a lot worse if it's a small industry and you know that they're not going outside that industry. Very quickly, your company will get a bad name for itself without really trying that hard. But the opposite is true. If people in the industry know that you're a great employer, that you gave people positive experiences, even when they were leaving, I mean, first of all, they might come back one day, in 3 or 4 years' time. They've picked up some more skills. They've done another 2 or 3 jobs since, and then you're getting them back and you've got all those extra skills as well. And what's that cost you, really? Nothing, basically. Nothing. So if we're going to be mercenary about it, there's that aspect of it as well. But I think, yeah, it's too easily overlooked, that sort of stuff. We might have already covered this, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Okay.
What would be your top tips? Let's say 3 top tips for a new manager or a first-time founder or an aspiring CEO.
Oh, these are good. So we have in our organization, we call them the 3 keys to clarity. So what they are specifically around your first time in leadership, your first time as a founder or an organization as a small business leader. That's actually, this is a perfect question. So the 3 are, number 1 is your business is your baby. I know we've talked a lot about entrepreneurial balance, but this is a different mindset and perspective, because oftentimes individuals, especially in leadership, when they're new and they're beginning to find success and they're starting to hire their first few employees, they get very connected to them. They get invested in them. Oftentimes they get to a point where they may be afraid because, you know, I gave the work to this individual and I don't want to have to take it back. Or what happens if I train them on these processes and they take it and they go to another customer? So they get really attached to these individuals. And so what we say at Clarity is, you know, your business, what you're providing, what you're doing, what you're building, that is your baby. Your employees, your team members, those individuals that work with you, those are the caretakers of your baby. So what you need to do is look at them not just as individuals who are working with you, but as individuals who are taking care of the organization. So you have to ask yourself in that framework, are they doing the best thing for my baby? Are they caring for it? Are they leaving it unattended? Are they putting it at risk? And if they are, then that's a different mindset that enables you to kind of look at the organization and look at the people that are working within the organization without getting too emotionally attached. The second thing that we talk about is hiring slow and firing fast. So making sure that you know as you're onboarding someone that they're a good fit for your organization. Have a conversation. Ask them good interview questions. Take time. Potentially, depending on where you are in the world, you can do a job shadow experience where they can work. You pay them for the day, but they at least get to see how you work and you get to see how they work, having that temporary type position. And then what I would say is when you realize that someone may not be a fit, the best thing that you can do is get them on the path to performance improvement quickly. And then if you realize that they're not going to be a fit, exit them. Give them the potential to work for someone else and pursue the opportunities and the dream that they want to have within another organization. It's okay to say this didn't work out. So oftentimes especially as first-time leaders and owners, we get this savior concept where I have to save this person. I know that I can make them better. I know that I can get them to love this job as much as I can. No, a lot of times you can't, David. So it's really important that you hire slow. And then when you know it's going to be an exit, you fire them fast. You let them go and let them pursue another opportunity. And the third is a phrase that my dad used to always say. And it's kind of like one of those Yogi Berra phrases of like, we're all friends until we're not. And what that means is ensure that you've got all of your contracts in place, your policies and procedures in place, because it's really easy to make a decision, have an arrangement, build a relationship with someone on a handshake. But if you don't have it documented, there are times where that handshake can almost become a punch in the face. So making sure that you have those things documented, whether it is a hiring agreement, whether it's a non-solicitation, we can all work within the same industry. But my customers are my customers for a set period of time. I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't solicit them if you decide to start your own business for a small period of time. Those types of things, making sure that let's not talk about the things that happened in our organization. You don't need to take technology or any of the IP with you. If you do, I'm going to fight you for it. And I'm not going to be nice because you're attacking and you're harming my baby, which is number one. So those are the three that I would talk about that I would say are the three keys to clarity, and making sure that as a first-time business owner, leader, founder, you really pay attention to. Knowing that your business, not your people, are your baby. Knowing that you hire slow and you fire fast. And then we're all friends until we're not. Having everything documented so we can make sure that when we enter and exit, it's all clean.
Okay. I'm going to take those in reverse order. I think the last one, 100%. I think any business arrangement, whether it's supplier, customer, employee, yes, it has to be on paper. The number of times that I've seen the handshake agreement turn into high six-figure lawsuits because somebody couldn't be bothered with the contract, it's just, that's a hard lesson learned for me. I'll never.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you make that mistake once, and then you don't make it again.
That's it, absolutely. But also, I think the other aspect of it is, even with a handshake, you're relying on a conversation. So you're relying on, first of all, both people sharing the same understanding of the same words, which isn't always necessarily true. Secondly, you're relying on both people having the same memory and recollection of those words. Definitely not true. And then thirdly, there's the bias aspect of it as well. And, the rose-tinted hindsight, all of that sort of stuff. So it's much better just have it written down.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be extensive, just enough that, anyway, off the soapbox on that one. The second one, so I hear the hire slowly, fire fast thing quite a lot. I definitely agree with fire fast. Like, as soon as you realise they're not a fit or their performance isn't going to be there and they, for whatever reason, it isn't going to improve, definitely get rid of them. I think the same thing, and again, it doesn't have to be done harshly, as we've already talked about, but the same thing applies, though, I think, to someone who is meeting all the performance requirements, but is having a negative impact on the rest of the team.
Yes.
It's not saying
Toxicity.
much more about that. Yeah. You're much better. Just move them along.
Yes. The amount of time we delay that short-term pain. So Gay Hendricks says that most disagreements are because we're avoiding a sweaty 10-minute conversation. Most miscommunication is because of that. Having that conversation is so important. And you hit the nail on the head with toxicity in the workplace. And because we take sometimes so long to make a decision as a business owner, because we just want that person to be better, we don't realize that we are creating a runway for an exit of other employees who may be more beneficial to the organization. You are so right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And meanwhile, all the time you're sort of umming and ahhing, or you're getting the savior complex for that one person. That same kind of message, however good the intent behind it may be, what it's telling everyone else in the team is that this one person's more important than all of them.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So where I have a slight disagreement, I think, is with the slow hiring. I think again, we're back to the B word. There's a question of balance to be had there.
Very
Because
true.
again, I've seen people, I've done it myself actually, you just spend months and months looking for the perfect candidate who just doesn't exist and never will. Again, there's no perfection in life, is there? And you end up just not finding anyone at all, or you end up hiring someone you're not really sure if they're right, but the ones that were closer, because it's been so long, they've found other jobs now and you miss the chance.
Yes.
And you end up and then you're back to the fire fast problem then, aren't you?
No, I think you're exactly right. So let's talk about hiring slow, because I think that sometimes you're right. It can be this misnomer of people think like, I have to wait for the perfect candidate. The perfect candidate is someone who can do 80% of what you need, because the other 20% is trainable. Let's think about that. And sometimes you can even make the argument, if it's a highly technical job, that it's the 20% that they need to know and the other 80% can be trainable. So you really have to have that balance. What I don't want you to do, and why I say hire slow, is that oftentimes in hiring, especially during COVID, we treated hiring like it was last call at the bar and I wasn't going to go home lonely. So we took anybody that had a pulse, anybody that could potentially have anything on their job. Like, you did this work. Okay, I'm going to hire you. And then we wound up being hostages to our organization. So when I say hire slow, it's follow your process and really know what you want. Doesn't mean that it's going to be the perfect person every time, but at least think through that process. Don't just hire someone because they check one box. They need to check like half the boxes before you have the interview and actually talk to the person. Don't just have that. I mean, especially when you're talking about a small business where you're going to be working across teams, potentially working in an office together or working in a virtual environment. It's important that you know that person has some level of communication skills, and you're not just going to get that from a written resume. So that's why we say at least hire slow and having a process. So I appreciate the clarification. It can be a misnomer for some people.
No, I do see where you're coming from. I think, it will flex, won't it, depending on the industry. I mean, I imagine particularly in insurance and healthcare, there's probably some pretty big regulatory requirements and legal ramifications that you have to think about. Also, maybe like how technical or specialist the role is and how much prior knowledge is actually required. All of those things, I'm sure, are part of the slow process, and having that set up and knowing what that is before you start. So assuming you have all of that in place and you know what the minimum criteria are, that could be maybe 2 or 3 of the boxes to tick. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
I think for me, once you're up at that minimum level to even like get to work on time and do the job, the basic level of the job, after that, you've got to focus on the attitude aspect, the work ethic, as much as you can assess these things, the personality even. And anything beyond that, I feel like those are skills. And anything that's a skill, you can teach that. You can't necessarily teach attitude, personality, or work ethic.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, I'm like you, I'm sure we've both got it right a few times and got it wrong more times. But
oh, absolutely. I have stories.
Another big issue I've had with it is the process of hiring people. Like, interviewing is so difficult to really get a gauge of what they're actually like.
Yes.
And I love your work shadowing idea. That is a great concept. I wish more companies would do that instead of an interview even.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of times we're seeing trending in Ohio, the work interview, where it is you're showing up for the day. We're compensating you for the day, but your interview starts when you show up. We're going to train you on how to do this because we want you to tell us if this is an environment that you want to work in as well. Because we may think everything's wonderful, but they may come in on the interview and realize like, oh, I didn't know I had to lift this, or that I was going to have to spend 3/4 of my day dialing a phone. Like, I don't want to talk on a phone. I want to talk on a computer. I want to have a screen. I don't want to deal with like ringing tones are hard for me. I mean, it's legitimate and it's actual. And I think that it can be really important to have those conversations, because what you don't want to do is invest all of that time in the interview process and somebody doesn't show up or they last a day, because really it doesn't matter how, I mean, How painful is that, David, when you've hired slow and now that you're a week in and this person's already gone and you're back to the drawing board? So making sure that you can be as transparent as possible with this is what the position is. Do you think you might want it? I think is really important.
Yeah, I think there's that flip side, isn't there, of the whole process that, again, a lot of employers don't like to think about, do they? But
No.
As much as the candidate is kind of selling themselves to you as the employer, the same is true in reverse as well, especially these days. And then your first one, I agree with that completely. I think it reminded me of that. I don't know if it's a cliche or a truism, or I can't remember where I saw it. It's probably one of those comics, the workplace ones in the paper way back when. But there's that conversation between the CEO and the CFO about what if I train up everyone, I upskill them, I give them all these amazing qualifications, and then they leave. And then the response is, yeah, but what if you don't? And then they stay.
Yes.
And that for me that's why personal development is a thing that leaders should care about.
Absolutely.
Enough said, like in that sentence, that covers it for me. But
yes. And especially if you want to build a business that you can walk away from and other people are going to manage, you have to develop your people, and building their skill set in leadership is just as important as you building yours.
I think we've probably talked quite a lot about leadership lessons that you've learned so far in your career. So I'm going to ask you the opposite question, which is, what would you say is the biggest mistake that you think a leader can make?
Refusing to ask for help, I think, is the biggest mistake that you can make, because you are far more effective and efficient in your career when you are willing to say, I need help with this. And I think about all of the things that I have done and some of the things that we've done in building clarity and building AUI. I think that we could have gone faster in some areas if I was willing to even ask for help. I don't know how to do this. Or I don't have to do it all myself. That's the other part. So oftentimes as emerging leaders, as entrepreneurs who are building a startup, we think that we have to do all of it, and we don't. So I would say the biggest mistake that I have made is not asking for help.
That's a good one. Yeah. I mean, it's so difficult though, isn't it? Because when you're a new leader and you're a bit younger and there is that sense, isn't there, that you don't want to be seen to be failing or weak or not knowing what you're doing.
Yes.
And asking for help in that context, ego, pride, all of those things play into it, is so difficult. And then by the time you get to a point in your career where you realize the value of it, a lot of time it's too late, isn't it?
Yes, you're so right.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it speaks to that myth of leadership as well, doesn't it? That leaders have to know everything and have to know all the answers. And I don't know where that myth has come from, really, because that's almost the opposite of the definition of a leader, isn't it? You're not the one who has to know all the things. You're the one who sets the vision, who marshals the people around the things that need to be done, and you have all the specialists in the team, and you've done your hiring right, and you've got your culture working, and all of these other things we've been talking about, then yeah, I mean, you don't sit back and put your feet up, obviously, but you also don't need to know everything about everything.
No. And I would say that especially as I've gotten more mature in my career, it's not the knowing everything, it's being able to ask questions. And I would say as I continue to level up and do bigger things, lead larger organizations, working on different projects, especially in the nonprofit world, it's really more about, I don't have to be the expert. I have to either know how to connect with the expert, but even more so, asking the questions so that I can understand and make decisions. So I would think that especially as you're thinking about what are skills that I can build as a leader as I continue to grow, being able to ask questions, framing a good question, and also not being afraid to ask what may be a dumb question, because there are no dumb questions, but it's being vulnerable and saying, I may not know the answer. This may be really simple. Please forgive me because I'm not understanding. Like the ability to just have a good conversation, asking those questions where you don't know the answer and then asking for help.
Yeah, curiosity is so powerful, isn't it, for leadership? I think, the real knowledge that a leader needs to have is knowing who to ask as well sometimes, isn't it? Who's most likely to have that answer?
That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, there are no stupid questions, definitely, although as a former manager of mine used to say, but there are stupid people. I don't like that, so I prefer, let's say, there are stupid answers.
Yes. I like that too.
What has been your best experience of being led?
Oh, that's a good one. So I would say my best experience in being led was in a emerging leaders organization that I was in called Torchbearers, which really got me connected into the community. And so it wasn't like one person was in charge. It was facilitation by committee. And so what it enabled was key individuals to come in and out of the organization as we're going through our learning process and going through what some of the programs were going to be and what our impact project was going to be for the year, where instead of it being you will follow and you will do, it was a collaborative conversation about how can we impact. So that, I would say, is probably one of the most impactful experiences I've had in being led, because the individual that was the executive director of the program did a really good job of facilitation where everyone felt like they were being heard. Everyone had a seat at the table, and she was actually in the background. So the person that was leading the organization, you never really even saw. And it felt like it was something where, when you talk about being in a group and being in collaboration, I thought it was a very effective way to be led. It's one of the most enjoyable experiences that I had, and it changed my life in thinking about community impact and serving our community.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, definitely. I do quite like that approach of just sort of sitting back and just listening and asking the right question at the right moment, and then just letting everyone figure it out themselves to a point.
Yeah.
Maybe this speaks to some people I've worked for in the past, but I think, that sort of leader who has to be at the front and always the one doing the talking and everyone else sort of sits in rapt attention listening to them, that isn't that effective, I find. Much prefer the listening approach, no question. And on the subject of questions, if you could start your career over again, would you do anything differently?
Oh, gosh, yes. I would start saying I don't know sooner. I'd stop worrying about what people think sooner. And I'd ask for help immediately. Those are the things that I would really start working on. And I'd build my interpersonal effectiveness skills on day one, as opposed to a decade into my career. I don't know. I'd leave the insurance and HR space. I'd probably still be there, but.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. That's a slightly different answer than I usually get. Normally it's well, maybe this, that, or the other, but actually no, because it got me where I am and I'm happy, which is fine. And I like that answer, but
I'd like to get there faster, David. I'm totally
Exactly.
okay with where I am, but
Yeah.
I could be a lot further if I would have just done some of these things at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Who wouldn't? Like, if I could go back in time and start my career over again, I'd take back a nice big pile of money and give it to myself and say, right, spend that on training. Off you go.
Exactly.
Leadership Heroes.
Chrissy, I've only got one question left for you.
Okay.
This is my favourite one. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you could pick one person, it could be anyone you like, they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that be and why?
So this is hard because I don't like to pick just one, but I will. And I won't pick the one that I normally pick because I want to be special. But you're going to be like, oh, great, she's the American. She's going to pick George Washington. I am, but here's why. At the end of his career and being president, George Washington had the opportunity to be king. He could have been reelected. He could have gone and done all sorts of different things in leadership. He didn't. He went back to Mount Vernon and became a farmer. He accomplished what he had set out to accomplish. And then when it was no longer his ball, he went home. And so for me, someone watching Washington who experienced ridiculous, obliterative failure throughout his military career, was a laughingstock, did not perform the way that he should have, but also owned, these are the mistakes that I made. He is a good example for me of not just how to lead, but also how to leave. Because leaving, I think, as a leader is just as important as being present and being in the seat. It's also how you exit that makes you and makes your legacy worthwhile.
It's a good point. Yeah. We have had him before. Not often and not for a long while. Been getting Abraham Lincoln a lot lately.
Oh, okay.
Been picking him a lot. I don't know if there's some documentaries come out and he's just front
There's
of mind for
a
everyone.
fair amount of documentaries that have come out. But for me, Washington and his leaving leaving Washington was what was important. Now, if you wanted the other one, I would say it's Tory Burch, but that's another story and that's another person. And you said one. So.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I find, even as a Brit, I find Washington fascinating, I must say. He's one of those, he's almost taken on this mythical nature now, hasn't he? But
agreed.
I think, it's been a while since he was chosen, but that same reason was given by the other guest who chose him. And it is a good reason, because he was the first one. He could have very easily just grabbed all the power and done whatever he wanted for the rest of his life. Maybe he kind of did do what he wanted for the rest of his life, actually. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe he didn't really, because he didn't really volunteer for it, did he? He was kind of pushed into it. So, I think there's a lot to be said for the slightly unwilling leader who never really sought power.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially at a national level. I think we'd all benefit from one of those right now, but but it's just such a fascinating character from history as well. And I guess, given the context of the revolution and everything, it might have been a bit hypocritical if he had stayed in power, mightn't it? Maybe it was less of a choice than we think it was.
Understanding purpose and mission. I think that's a long discussion.
It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Chrissy, that's pretty much all we've got time for. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed talking to you. One final little question I'll ask you is, if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you and what you do, is there a website or similar that you could point them towards?
Absolutely. I would say connect with me on LinkedIn, Chrissy Myers, CEO. I mean, our company names are AUI and Clarity HR. You can connect through that. And then my book is Reluctantly Resilient, and it's available on Amazon, and also reluctantlyresilientthebook.com is the website.
Perfect. And I'll put all of those links in the episode description so people can find it easily. Well, that's it. Thank you again so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, David.
Thank you, Chrissy, for your time and for sharing all of your wisdom with us today. Well, an hour's worth of your wisdom, at least. I'm sure there's plenty more where that came from. Listener, don't forget to hit those links in the description to learn more about Chrissy, what she does, and perhaps get a copy of that book. If you have enjoyed today's episode and the podcast generally, and you'd like to support what we are doing here at Leading with Integrity, while also becoming a more active member of the Leading with Integrity community, then please do come and join us at our online community. It's called Integrity Leaders. It is the community for new leaders, first-time founders, and learner managers. As always, you'll find the link in those show notes in the episode description below or to the side, depending on where you're listening and where they've put it. Frankly, a lot of the time it's out of my hands. Thank you for listening today. I hope you'll be back with me again next week when I'm talking to my next guest, Philip Blackett, about how to disagree without disrespect, without losing friends or colleagues, and why that is an all-important but steadily lapsing skill in the modern age. So something a bit different, but as important as ever for struggling leaders to get to grips with. So I'll talk to you again soon, and until then, be a leader, not a boss.